My life changed dramatically yesterday at 6:45 a.m. Can you hear me okay? 6:45 a.m. I was on my way to work. My husband and I were actually on our ways to work at the same time, which is very unusual. But his car was behind mine, and we stopped at the red light of Gessner and Hempstead Highway. Now, I don't know if you know that intersection, but it's very busy. Gessner has 4 lanes, 2 going north, 2 going south. Hempstead Highway has 7 lanes, 3 going east, 3 going west, and a turn. And believe it or not, at 6:45 a.m., there were a lot of people out on the road already on a Saturday morning. I was thinking they should be at home sleeping. But we were all out there. And my husband rang me up at the red light, and he said, "Patty, do you see that little kitten over there by the median?" And I looked, and it was dark. And I said, "No." And he said, "Right across from you, right on the curb, right there by the median. It's right there." And I looked, and I corrected him because he's my husband. I told him that is a rat. And he corrected me because he is my husband. And he said, "No, it is a kitten." So I got out of my car and I walked across, and sure enough, there was a potato-sized kitten. A little itty-bitty kitty. And I picked that baby up, and I went back to my car, and I put it on my lap, and the light turned green, and I drove, and I thought, what are you doing? What happens next in this story? I'm going to work. For you that don't know me, I'm a psychotherapist. I had 9 sessions scheduled. And I thought, I cannot do this with a cat. So I stopped first at my husband's work. And I gave him the baby, which may or may not have been a good idea because he fell in love. I'm at work working, thinking, what are we going to do with this cat? He is taking itty-bitty kitty to the vet. He is hand-feeding itty-bitty kitty with a little bottle. He is making a bed for itty-bitty kitty. He is brainstorming names for itty-bitty kitty. And I'm thinking, are we going to give this cat away? Who would like it? But then, at the end of my day, I stopped at his studio because he had tickets to the UFOH football game, University of Houston, and he gave me the baby, the little teeny baby that sits in my hand, and I drove home to write a sermon about solitude. And suddenly my solitude was interrupted with itty-bitty kitty. But this is what I learned right off, that this little one, it's less than 3 weeks old, we don't know how old, but it's little tiny, acts like a baby, a real baby. It sleeps a lot. I'm so grateful because I needed to write a sermon. So finally, after I give it the milk, and put it in the little bed, it goes to sleep. Solitude walks in one more time for me, opens my creative brain out, gives me some words, gives me some sentences that I am frantically writing because itty-bitty kitty doesn't sleep very long. It wakes up. It has to be fed every 4 hours. And it meows and cries unless you hold it and pet it. And you cannot type doing that. I tried. But suddenly I was aware of experiencing alone and together. I was aware of experiencing what solitude felt like and what community felt like. And as Dr. Seuss says, life is a great balancing act. We actually need both. We need solitude and we need community. There's a story about Thomas Jefferson. I don't know if it's true. I did read it on several sources on the internet, so it's true, right? And it goes like this. I don't know if it's a myth or not, but it said of Thomas Jefferson that he turned his bed sideways in his room. So the headboard was at one wall and the footboard was at the other wall. And he placed his bed right in the middle of the room. So every morning, depending on his mood, he would decide what side of the bed to get out of. If he got out of one side, his clothes closet was there, the hallway was there, down to the dining room where he could dine with the many guests that always just happened to show up at Monticello as his house. However, if he was not in the mood for people, he would get out on the other side of the bed, where he had his very large library of books, his writing desk, and his one solitary chair. It's not that easy for us nowadays, though. I'm aware that life has gotten more complicated since then. That we live in a chaotic, busy, overscheduled digital age. Have you noticed that? Where it's actually easier than ever to gain the whole world, but to lose your soul in the process. Henry David Thoreau died at the age of 44. It was in 1862. And before he died, he wrote about the changes in noise on his 44 years on the planet. He wrote about the noisiness of machines and the noisiness of those trains that screech on the rails. And I think to myself, if Thoreau were to come back today, somehow he was able to show up, he would be amazed at the noise level that we live with today. The cacophony, planes, trains, automobiles, jackhammers, our ice machine on our refrigerator, the ding on our microwave, our cell phones, our televisions, our movie houses, he would probably be overwhelmed by the noise pollution. In fact, I had a client that came back this week to the United States after spending 1 year in Korea, and spending 1 year in Spain, and spending 1 year in Argentina. She said she knew the transition back to the United States was going to be iffy, a little tricky. But she was not counting on a total and complete meltdown at the grocery store. She said to me, it was like a fire hose had been pointed at me and turned on. I felt like I was drowning. There are too many choices. She left after 2 aisles. She started having a panic attack. I can't cope with all these choices. And I'm here to say to you that you live with that fire hose in this country every day. We are all getting drowned by overstimulation. Part of it, I think, is this obsession with connection. Have you noticed that? We are so connected nowadays. We have cell phones, we have text messages, we have emails, Instagram, Snapchat, you name it. We have lots of ways to stay in touch. And I don't know about you, but I have noticed in myself and those around me that we jump when our phone dings and we want to know who is talking to us, who is calling us. Does anybody have that experience besides me? Yeah, I want to ding. Oh, wait, excuse me. So much so, all these connections that we have are actually leading us to a shallowness in our relationships. In fact, I read a research study, a 2013 research study in England, where 62% of women admitted to interrupting a sexual encounter in order to check their phone. Men did a little bit better. Only 48% of them admitted to doing the same thing. 46% of the total population said they didn't think their partner minded. And I said to myself, are you kidding? Really? What is happening in our world? And what can we do to change it? How can we stay emotionally and spiritually alive and awake so we can have deep connections with people? I believe the answer is in solitude. We must get to that balance of together and alone, of solitude and community. Because without that silence, that break from the cacophony of noise pollution we live in, we get depressed. We get shallow. We actually get disconnected. Anthony Storr has written a book called Solitude. It's almost an attempt to balance out the hundreds of books that are written on relationships. There's one, Solitude. He states, "Please understand, we shall always need others. Deep within the human brain is the knowledge that survival depends on cooperation. We need others for brainstorming and collaboration. At the very least, we need to consult with each other for reality check." Solitude is necessary, though, to bring balance to your life. You can't live on constant full tilt without eventually falling over. It's a law of physics. Time alone can give us space to recharge and reconnect with the relationship with ourselves. May Sarton is one of my favorite poets, and she wrote the Journal of Solitude. She tells the story of herself at 58 years old when she was so off balance that she decided solitude was going to heal her. And she took 1 year off from society. She took 1 year off from talking to any people. And what happened to her is she came to see the time by herself as real life, as her real, authentic self. She came to believe that she was now able to self-define without any interruption from anybody else's opinion. She was able to go in and figure out, what do I believe? What do I feel? What do I stand for? Who am I? And that's part of the present we get with solitude. We are not concerned about putting on an act for someone else. Nobody else is watching us in solitude. Nobody is there to tell us, you're wearing that. Nobody is there to give their opinion about why we're thinking or doing anything. It's just a moment with ourselves. Anne Morrow Lindbergh says it this way: solitude is a temporary place to recover from the world. It's necessary so we can sort out who we are again. So one thing solitude and silence gives us is that balance and the space to reconnect with ourselves. But another thing it gives us is creativity. If you want to be more creative, I encourage you to spend more time alone. And I'm not talking about loneliness that's just kind of forced upon you. I'm talking about intentional solitude, on purpose, getting the world out so I can connect in to myself and my creativity. Carl Jung fostered creativity by prescribing daily solitude to all of his psychiatric patients. I love that. Because he believed that the creative process actually took part mostly in solitude. We have to have time and space to think, to daydream, to wander, to just, not have to associate with anything, but just to be able to think any thought that comes to our mind. Not to worry about what other people are thinking at all. Bill Gates' mother tells a story about him when he was a teenager, and she was trying to hurry him up so they could go somewhere. And Bill, they called him Billy at the time, was very exasperated and said, "Mother, please, don't you ever take time just to think?" And she looked at her husband, who was scrambling to get the other kids ready, and they're, overwhelmed with life, and they looked at each other and said, "No." Thank goodness Billy did. All of his thinking in those teenage years allow us to have personal computers at prices that we can afford at a small size instead of the room of this building, a computer. Solitude gives us balance and it gives us creative space. The last thing I think that solitude gives us that is very important is a connection to the universe, a deepening of our spirit. It allows for intentional time to listen to the quiet, to hear the voice of God speak to you, to commune with the great mystery of life, to feel one with everything that there is. Our seventh principle here at Unitarian Universalist Faith is that we promote and we affirm a respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are part. I am telling you, in silence and in solitude, you can connect to that interdependent web of life. In fact, some people believe to have intentional solitude is the most fundamental of all spiritual disciplines, and that it is the necessary component in order to have a life well lived. In my research for this sermon, I read a lot of Christian sermons, or at least part of them, and they had a consensus about solitude. One after the other said, solitude is the time to commune with God. Now, as a you, I don't care if you believe in God. I don't care what you call that sacredness. You can call it sacredness. That solitude gives us an opportunity to commune with sacredness, a higher energy, something bigger than ourselves. It's the time where we can listen and talk to that small inner voice that is in each one of us. One of the peak moments of my life happened about 6.5 years ago when I was invited up to a private island off the northwest coast to work with a couple there for a week. They owned the island. They were the only people on the island. And they had the island cleaned of anything that was dangerous. Everything that was poisonous was taken off, and everything that was predatory was taken off. So I had this sacred, amazing experience of walking in the forest totally unafraid. I felt completely safe with the calmness and the silence that surrounded me. It was indeed a spiritual experience. You can have that too by connecting with nature and connecting with silence. That interconnectedness with all being, where everything feels right with the world. That's how important solitude is. gives us balance, it opens up our creativity, and it lets us connect on a deep spiritual level to something bigger than ourselves. How about you? How are you doing? How are you doing as far as the balance in your life? If you are feeling stuck at all in any place in your life, I'm going to encourage you to tell yourself the truth. How much solitude are you getting? Not loneliness, intentional solitude, going into the quiet. How do we do that? How do we join with solitude? I think we have to do it deliberately. I think we have to carve out time. Today I'm going to spend 10 minutes in the morning in silence. Not doing anything, just closing my eyes and being one with my breath, being one with the air around me, being one with the chair that I'm sitting on. If you don't make time for it, the busyness of this world, particularly this country, will swallow you up. It'll turn that fire hose onto you full steam ahead and overwhelm you and throw you off. So I have a challenge for you and a challenge for me. I challenge you to turn off your cell phone for 24 hours. To turn off your electric devices, all your electronics, your internet for 24 hours. I want to ask you, when's the last time you did that? Anybody did it yesterday? One person. Look at the rest of us. Yeah. I'm responding to that ding. So, I encourage you to take 24 hours and see what that feels like. My husband and I have a little getaway house up by Lake Conroe, and we don't have internet there on purpose. When people come to stay, they're like, "What's the password?" The password is silence. We don't have that here. I'm sorry. It's done on purpose. Also, I want to give you permission to say no. If you feel a need to recharge and you're being asked to go to this event or this committee or do this piece of work, you're allowed to say no. I'm sorry, I can't fit that into my schedule because I'm busy. And you can say in your head, doing nothing. I used to have a secretary when I was in my early 20s. She was in her late 50s. So I thought of her as a little odd. Because she would call in sometimes and ask for a personal day because she wanted to watch her hair grow. Sometimes she would say, "I've got to watch my fingernails grow today." And I thought, okay. But now that I'm that old, wise woman, I understand what she was talking about. She was saying, I need to break away and recharge in solitude. Another thing you can do to connect to your solitude, of course, is go to nature. Thoreau told, or Emerson, I guess is the one that said, that in nature we return to reason. And that's what I'm talking about. We have to have that balance to return to reason. Of course, you can always meditate. You can pray or not. You can meditate if you don't believe in prayer. And that's okay too. Just get quiet with the nothingness and you will recharge. Or you could go to a library. When's the last time you were at a library? The library in Sarasota, Florida, has a room with a sign on it that says, "No cell phones allowed. No laptops allowed. No electronics of any kind allowed in this room. Here, paper books are welcome." Find yourself a quiet space with a paper book to read. And finally, don't be afraid to kick everybody out of your house. Not permanently. But for the afternoon, for the evening, for the weekend, whatever. I mean, I love my husband and I love my children, but I tell you, that sweet bliss of being in my home by myself is restorative. I particularly recommend this to people where you're both retired, that you ask that person to leave for just a little bit and go do something so you can have some space, restorative space in your own home. In closing, I'd like to quote the UU minister Roger Fritz of Sarasota, Florida, which, by the way, UU, for people that are here for the first time, stands for Unitarian Universalism. I remember the first service I went to, they kept talking about the UUs. I thought, well, who are they? And they're the Unitarian Universalism people. Roger Fritz says, indulge in your solitude. Get away. Be alone. Search inside. Touch a higher realm. Enter into the divine and let your spirit soar. May it be so. Blessed be and amen.